Well, hello, everyone. I'm Larry Bennett with Nordcompo, and I'm here today with Kelly Gallagher. Many of you know Kelly. Kelly Gallagher is a respected leader in our industry, a valued colleague, a customer, and most importantly, a friend. He's been a trusted advisor to numerous publishers and industry organizations, offering insights and guidance that have made a lasting impact. He currently serves as Vice President of Content Acquisition at Ingram Content Group, where many of you have interacted with him, I'm sure. His previous roles include the publisher at Beacon Hill Press, VP of Business Development at ECPA, the Evangelical Christian Publishers Association, and VP of Publisher Services at Bowker. He also spends some of his time doing work for the poorest of the poor, and something for which I have deep respect and admiration for what he does, helping to just bring up people who have nothing in third world countries. So Kelly, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation today.
Thanks, Larry. Happy to spend some time with you today and look forward to our conversation.
Great. Well, why don't we jump right into it? So let's talk about Ingram. Ingram has changed a lot in the last 5 to 10 years, trying to stay ahead of the changes in the industry. Can you give our audience a brief summary of how you and Ingram has been helping publishers large and small, US based and international?
Sure. In a nutshell, Ingram's focus since its inception has always been helping the industry connect with readers, and really, we think of ourselves, regardless of all the different things that we do, that company that sits in the middle and helps distribute content globally. And so for us, that journey, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, has, really morphed into a lot of different ways to make that happen, whether it's through digital ebook distribution as the largest distributor of digital content around the globe, whether it's print on demand, where now almost 3 in every 10 books that we distribute is actually a book that was printed at the point that we received the order. And that's also happening again at a global scale. So the whole idea of less inventory, less waste, and actually printing to an order, or whether it's through working with our 600 different publishers where we do distribution services, where essentially we can offer that full service process of both selling, promoting, and helping to distribute that content for publishers directly. And even more acutely and more recently, working in all segments of retail and now especially libraries, helping, again, consumers find that content where they need to find it, whether it's through a library or a retailer, et cetera, but really being that hub and doing it in as many ways as the technology takes us, especially in recent years.
Sure. And I understand. Just so the audience knows, from 2006 to 2010, I was with Baker and Taylor. And in my roles at Baker and Taylor, running Spanish and running POD, we used to think of Ingram as the bad guys. And we claimed to be the largest wholesaler, and book wholesaler, and Ingram claimed to be the largest bookseller. And who knows? But today, sadly, B&T seems to be shutting their doors, and Baker and Taylor was founded in the early 1800s. It's sad to see people go. Is that creating challenges and opportunities for Ingram as well?
Well, certainly. And Ingram has always stood by the need for a healthy book industry. And so whenever any part of that industry needs to end its run, it always has an effect on the industry. And while we all in some ways may compete in the book industry, keeping our book industry healthy and growing is always at the forefront of our thoughts. And so obviously with the closure of Baker and Taylor, it's offered opportunity for us to step in and ensure that we can keep that continuity going through library markets and through other kinds of services. We've been in the library space for quite a long time. And so it's our intention that we continue to help librarians connect with content so that their patrons have access to it. We're doing quite a bit right now to ensure that that supply chain can go on uninterrupted. Obviously, it's a big shock to the system. So yes, we hate to see when any part of the industry has a challenge, but we also want to make sure that Ingram's rising to the challenge to keep the continuity going ultimately so that readers and patrons can still connect with the content.
Sure. And knowing you for a long time, I know that you particularly have been helpful to just many other people and entities in the industry. And I can see that that's a core value of Ingram, which is admirable. So let's talk about book publishing as a whole. It's a low margin business. It's a slow to no growth business, as you've pointed out in different presentations. So most of the growth in the past few decades has come from digital, ebooks and audiobooks. So Kelly, do you see opportunities for growth in specific genres or international markets, other formats?
Sure. I think you mentioned a couple different things there. I'll start with the last one and move toward the first one. Internationally, there is still a lot of growth going on in the book publishing industry. And part of our goal is to ensure we've got the best possible global catalog. And so Ingram with, connectivity, whether it's through owned facilities and services or partnerships, we really are focused on the global opportunities. Countries like India, Southeastern Asia, Mexico, other Latin American countries that are still seeing good double-digit book growth. We believe there's great opportunity not only for connectivity with English language produced content, whether it's from the UK, AU, US, but also just global languages. And so, we've taken a big stake in that. In fact, probably about 20% of our whole Ingram wholesale catalog is in non-English language content. So we definitely see growth there. Related
Wow.
to digital and audio, absolutely. Those are the growth segments. Ebooks, a little less so, but certainly in audio. And again, our goal is not to produce the content, but to give content access into different channels. And so we are continuously looking for new distribution partners that we can help for publishers who have that content created to have access to those markets. And just in the last couple of years, we probably added 20 or 30 different channels for both ebooks and audiobooks.
And what about video? I have a 22-year-old daughter, and all they do is look at videos all day, unfortunately, or whatever. But do you see like book content sort of morphing into videos, more video type content in the long run?
I think certainly, short form video has interest in this space. I don't see anything today that would indicate a strong movement or trend toward that, but I certainly wouldn't count it out. We're much more of a visually oriented community these days, but I don't see it yet happening today. We see the intersection is certainly in social media where people are talking about books or engaging with content, printed content or digital content. And so more video on people influencing the content that's coming out today. And then also the real ongoing connection between video and book content is in what's happening with TV series and others that are really combing through the backlist to find the great stories
Hmm.
from book and put them into video. There's been a real resurgence, especially with the growth of services like Netflix and Hulu, et cetera. In fact, we launched a product just recently this year that focuses on helping book publishers expose rights opportunities to the production houses within Hollywood or globally. It's called Media Scout, but it's really helping that connectivity to happen.
So we're looking for the next Game of Thrones.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's get back to those international markets, which I think are fascinating. And I've heard you talk about it before, saying international markets are becoming increasingly important to publishers versus selling rights, especially as growth slows in the U.S. There's some numbers to throw out. Worldwide, there are 1.2 billion Mandarin speakers, more than 600 million Hindi speakers, almost 600 million native Spanish speakers, and 335 million Arabic speakers. But, as I've learned, there are significant logistical challenges in China, especially in the emerging markets like Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and India. So how can publishers reach readers in those markets versus just selling rights, Kelly? And is it worth it? Is it worth the effort?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think the rights market today is doomed in the immediate future. But what I will say is with the advent of AI and translation opportunities, it's something that I think increasingly publishers are going to take a second look at. And so I do see a long-term trend moving toward publishers potentially retaining their rights, going and translating those rights themselves, translating those books themselves, and not offering up rights in local countries. It's pretty typical that most books that rights are sold, they have a hard time even with the earn back. I think we're going to continue to see more rights retention, and especially as publishers have greater access to sell in global markets. Again, whether it's through our Ingram network or any other networks that are developed globally, that we're going to see much more of that stay within the original content publisher, where they will keep their English language rights, sell them globally, and then they'll look to translate themselves and have global sales as well. Because we also know that just because something's translated in Spanish doesn't mean that it couldn't potentially sell in India. Just a fun fact there, Ingram last year, we sold over $250,000 of Spanish content in India last year, just simply because we had that content available to a global space. It's not a market you're going to think about selling Spanish content in, but as you get this ubiquitous catalog with multiple languages, it's just really any diaspora that can find that content, regardless of what continent they're on, they're going to have access to it. And I think that's kind of the big trend that we're going to see continuing to happen.
Do you see opportunities, especially in Africa, which I know has been sort of like, besides Antarctica, the hardest continent to reach?
Yeah, there's many, because of the footprint of the Europeans in Africa, there's a big contingency of French speakers in Africa. There are Spanish speakers in Africa. There are English speakers in Africa.
And Portuguese.
And again, as that content is made available, as retail, begins to take a foothold, and, especially large .coms, find ways into the supply chain, having that content available for sale through a more virtual network that can deliver that content. Absolutely. I think that's going to be transformational. It's already starting to happen.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. Let's talk about some of the challenges for smaller publishers. Publishing world continues to evolve. Baker and Taylor, just as an example, consolidation in general has made it difficult for the smaller players. So what would you recommend for small to mid-sized publishers to be heard over all noise and self-published authors as a second part of that question?
Well, it's a great question, Larry. I agree. It's a challenge, but never before has the opportunity been so great, because the playing field has been equalized. And what I mean by equalized is, if you can create the content and you can get it into a global distribution network similar to something that Ingram would do, or Libri in Germany, or any number of these organizations that have the ability to make your content live and discoverable, it opens up a whole new world for you. And so the keys, though, that are necessary is that discoverability. And so ensuring that you've got the best possible metadata. If you're a US publisher or you're a UK publisher, are you putting thema codes into your metadata if you want to have global access and global sales? Are you putting BISAC codes on your content if you're a French publisher looking to sell within the US? Are
Hmm.
you updating keywords? If your books are being sold into another language, are you doing multi-language short descriptions? To me, we call that level one marketing. That's the first thing you've got to be focused on is discoverability. The second thing you've got to be focused on is what we would call level two marketing, which is this B2B connectivity. Where and how many places is that book discoverable? So you've got good metadata, but are you ensuring that the book is being made available in as many channels as possible? And then the third area for a small publisher to consider is what are you doing to engage with the consumer? In other words, if consumers aren't aware of the content, not just the retailers, but then you've got a real challenge. And that's where having a social media presence and engaging with things like book talk and other areas where you can use relatively low amount of marketing dollars, but giving that book representation to consumers such that the consumer can find out about it and then they can discover it on a particular website from a retailer, and that retailer is going to serve up the information because there's good metadata. So I see all three of these ticking and tying together.
That's great advice, Kelly. Thank you. So self-publishing, as you know, when we first started, you and I in the publishing industry, traditional publishers publish maybe 250,000, 300,000 books a year in the United States. And according to Bowker data anyway, and now just self-publishing, which you guys with Ingram Spark have really helped overall, has grown that title count to over 2 million per year. But that's that, but making that even more of a challenge for discoverability is AI generated books. Do you think that AI generated books present a big challenge to discoverability? Is it going to mess things up, make it much, much harder?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, right? So, and when we use the term AI generated books, is it AI assisted? In other words, I'm using AI to help me with a writing prompt and I'm going to then create the content. Is it AI where I've written the content, but AI is going to maybe help me write it better? Is it AI where I've got a good manuscript, but I also want to produce it in Spanish, that I allow AI to create that first level translation that I can then go back through and create a better book? Is it AI that's going to put voice to it? Or is it AI that's, I'm going to give it 5 prompts and it's going to write an entire book? So these are the big questions that everybody is facing today. And at what level do I even then, after the content's been created, want to serve up that content to a large language model to allow that to help others in the future? So you asked a far-ranging question. I've given you far-ranging answers. And for us, what we do want to guard against in the Ingram catalog in our position is it's less about AI and it's more about quality content being sold into the marketplace today. We know today because we've seen it through not publishers, but through others that are trying to make a fast buck, that you can create some really horrible AI content really fast. And so we have very little interest because, again, the catalog we want to serve up to consumers and retailers is something that they can trust that they're going to have the experience that's been intended. AI only helps you create bad content quicker. We've had bad content, forever, right? So
Right.
remember the days of Wikipedia books, where somebody was basically just copying Wikipedia articles. So it's been around forever. What we want to guard against is the speed with which it's now being created. And so, our intention is to, we're not anti-AI in any sense. In fact, we're very pro-AI. But what we do want to guard against is, the risk of copyright infringement, where AI could go too far in taking some original works and recreating them, or creating just in general bad content. And that's really where we want to draw the line. But to have an author use it to help him or her, translate a book into Spanish, I think that's great. Again, provided that what the output is really what the Spanish speaker intended it for.
Of course.
So
And I
that's
was really,
our stance on that.
no, and I appreciate it. And what I was really focused on in asking that question was what people are starting to call junk books.
Yeah.
where Amazon gets from one publisher 50 books a day.
Right.
And then when you do a deep dive into the author's bio, you find out there's nothing.
Right.
That author doesn't really exist. And I think that that's part of the challenge, although you might argue also that because of lack of good metadata and lack of good reviews, those books are just sort of going to die a natural quick death. That makes sense?
Well, you would hope, but it doesn't mean that bad actors can't also create good metadata or fake reviews or anything else. And so my point and what I hope listeners, the takeaway is these problems have always persisted amongst us. We have always had bad actors that have created really bad content. What we've got to be careful with at AI is the speed with which it's being produced now. And
Yep.
so that's where we ensure that we've got a good process in place. I can't speak to Amazon's for Ingram, and because we also have a large self-publishing program called Ingram Spark, our intention always is going to be to validate the producer of the content first and then the content itself. In other words, you can tell pretty quickly if the producer of that content is a genuine participant in the book publishing industry, or they're, as you said, trying to make a fast buck. And so that's where we want to be cautious. It's just the speed with which it's coming now is, you're right, there's a lot of junk out there.
Sure. Now, let's talk a little bit more about AI. In his book, The AI Revolution in Book Publishing, Thad McElroy, who's a recognized industry expert in metadata and AI, he posits that like the advent of railroads, steam engines, and transistors, AI is, for book publishing, a potentially disruptive technology. Do you agree, Kelly? And where do you see the maximum disruption coming in?
Yeah, it's, disruptions are good and bad. And so it's absolutely disrupting the industry right now with on the bad, the junk books and the risk for large language models potentially co-opting original works. And on the good, it's, I think, going to be transformative in things like translated rights for publishers, or in other areas where they can utilize AI to help them. You think about it from the academic sense, not just the trade sense, but when a book is finished, a textbook or a highly technical citated book, to give that to AI to create the back matter for a book, which sometimes can take publishing houses months to create, where that could then be created in literally a day or two. Those are really powerful tools that I think are going to have an impact in disrupting the industry for the good.
Yeah. And so looking at it from a long-term perspective, let's say over 5 to 10 years, AI has been around since the 1940s in some form or another. But Chat GPT, everybody kind of knows the story. About 3 years ago, all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it. And in 2 months, ChatGPT had like 20 million users. It took Facebook 2 years to get to that level. So it's changing every month. At least it seems that way. So how do you see it over the next 5 to 10 years? And do you see a difference for trade publishers versus the academic and scholarly publishers, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Between the two, I think, again, um, what I see more than, you're right, some form of large language models, some form of generative uh, creation of content has been around for a while. Um, but now it's all about the speed with which it's happening. So, each week brings a new thought or approach. And so it's going to happen. The proverbial horse is out of the horses are out of the barn. What I think us as an industry need to be focused on is not necessarily the input of what's being built for these large language models. It's really, how do we manage the output side of it so that we can utilize AI in a safe, responsible way, and it can help us really transform our businesses, but at the same time, respect the rights of authors and artists, etc. I think whether it's academic, scholarly, or trade, our big focus for harnessing this is going to be how we manage the output side of it. And so
Hmm.
input, I think that's already happened. It's all going to be at some point ingested, but we still have an opportunity. And I'm glad organizations like the AAP are working to define that. Back in the early 2000s, Google had a large scanning project. We all remember that, right? And there were all
Sure.
kinds of fear and lawsuits that in that scanning, it would disrupt the industry in a very, very bad way. And I think what happened was, which is what I hope happens now, is at some point we took less of a concern on the input, the scanning, and then we put our focus and energy on what was allowed for the output. And so if you recall, ultimately what that ended up with, and I don't know the exact percentage, but what was defined was that, yes, you can do this, but the output had to be limited to a specific set of criteria. In other words, like you could only show 20% of a book at any given time,
Hmm.
et cetera, right? And so I think with AI, to the extent that we can harness what is the output such that it respects the rights of authors, artists, et cetera, but still provides a very valuable and powerful tool, I think that's ultimately going to be to the benefit of everyone.
Well said. And how do you think it'll be AI will be more helpful to publishers in the long run or to authors?
Oh, of course. The tools at the disposal of an author and I say artist, meaning like the cover, the generation of covers,
Hmm.
the generation of look and feel of a book. It's about the words. It's about how, which, is your specialty, obviously, how those words are made to look inside of a book. And then what goes on the wrapper, on the cover. Those are all the components of a book that each have their own place with publishing, and then ultimately how they'll be impacted by AI. I think there will be a place for all of that to be done better with greater level of excellence. And again, provided we can manage how that happens and how we can utilize those tools in a responsible way, it's only going to make for, I think, better books in the future. You know, the concept of creating original thought, putting it on, paper, whether it's e-ink or actual paper, and then putting it and publishing it, will continue. And I think these are the tools that are going to, potentially make it better.
Well, I guess where I'm going with this is that Thad McElroy in his book at least says that AI is going to empower authors more so than publishers, that authors will get
Oh,
more
sure.
use out of AI than publishers. Do you see it that way with all the
Yeah.
tools you
I
guys are
mean,
creating?
I think it's a good statement. I think there are a lot of other things happening today in this space, regardless of AI, that are empowering authors. And we see this with our Ingram Spark brand. We have a pro service at Ingram Spark where we've got thousands of authors that have chosen to stay as independent authors. And we don't even look at it as self-published. I think that has a bit of a negative mystique to it, but these are highly competent, formerly published with big house authors that have chosen to go their own path because of, similar to what, the quote you were giving, but then just in other ways, because they now have these tools at their disposal to create great marketing,
Hmm.
to do things through social media, to use some AI tools for how not only they market and promote their books, but how they create their books, such that there is at some level, disintermediation happening already in the industry. And I think that will continue, that we will see some authors that choose to continue to go the traditional route, but that many authors will maintain their own independent route, or a co-op of authors, or some new thing. We had hybrid publishers a few years ago and that's now a thing, right? And so I think those manifestations will only continue to grow because these authors are empowered with these kinds of tools.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Final thought, Kelly, what advice would you give to an aspiring or a recent graduate who's interested in getting into book publishing?
Wow. I think obviously we've talked a lot about technology here, Larry. I think the convergence of original content and the concept around publishing, I think will always be there. And so somebody who wants to get involved really has to have a love for words, how words are created, how words are then crafted into a book. And that was kind of your ticket in the past. Now you've got to also be able to have that overlay of really understanding technology, understanding how to engage with consumers through social influence. So it's these layers now, right? That
Hmm.
if you want to be an aspiring editor or marketer or whatever, you've got to have a love for the content, and you've got to have, a level of social and technical savviness that is going to allow you to be kind of have your toolbox completely full.